Alright, what's up, Dragon Brood? Today we're going to talk about the cards that just got banned for standard, what possibly else could have been banned, and what does it mean as far as cards you need to be targeting or maybe even keeping an eye out for the future. But to start with, no surprise, Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Right, we knew this card was going to be on there. It literally appears in every red deck. Like, the real problem here is that even when you don't really need to play the card, you're still kind of like, I don't know, you're still advantaged to play the card because there's just so much value in it, which that's not necessarily a thing I think Wizards wants, just from a deck building perspective. It's one card that effectively gives you three really good effects and possibly more value if the goblin doesn't die, or you have something great to copy. So, yeah, the card kind of had to go because it's just making too many quality situations out of non quality situations, if that makes sense. So, yeah, not a surprise. Totally agree with this one. Then the other one I think we all wanted to see did happen, and that's Invoke Despair. Now, this card does look a little weird because of the casting cost. You say, like, well, this seems like it should be totally fair because it's got 4 black in the cost. Not particularly because, well, the other cards that accompany it make it really easy to play this. Kind of like we were just talking about with Fable. You can just get that extra treasure and make it easier to cast this card, right? Even on time if you want to on the following turn, which is kind of crazy. But also cards that are, or decks that are playing multiple colors, are able to play enough black lands to still play this card. And it allows black, and Wizards did allude to this in their announcement, it allows black to get rid of cards like Planeswalkers and even enchantments that they tend to have a harder time with, to deal with those while also dealing with other things, which create situations that give you very little counterplay to do things that would generally be good against the decks that would otherwise not be able to play Invoke Despair. So it'd be interesting to see what things look like without this in the picture. Now, a little bit of a lesser one that was on some people's lists and not on others was Reckoner Bankbuster. And Wizards basically said the problem with this card is that it was the go-to card advantage card in a lot of lists. Mostly because it's colorless and gets to be splashed at everything. But really that leads to two situations. One, that because it can become a 4/4 and be crewed for 3, some creatures were being chosen to be put into decks that otherwise wouldn't just because they crew Bankbuster. Also, it was a card advantage card that also hindered your opponent's creatures, which is kind of spectacular for a lot of decks. But additionally, it meant a lot of other cards that can create some level of card advantage just weren't getting played. Because why would you play those when you could just have an easier time playing Bankbuster? You get a blocker and a card, or 3 cards, and potentially a second creature because eventually makes a token and a treasure. Right? Card is really good. No surprise. Makes sense that one's gone. But then that brings us to the list of cards that what else should have been, could have been, and now that they're not, we have to look out for. So if we could get rid of Farewell, I'd be pretty happy with that. But I totally get it. This card's still going to be around. We're going to have to deal with it. I don't think it's a good standard to have Farewell and Sunfall both available at the same time. So that's a little bit off-putting that those are going to exist. And I assumed Farewell could have potentially got the boot because we now have Sunfall. But it's whatever. We'll deal with it. Just something you have to be aware of that's out there. But then that brings us to a card like Graphene. We know that this card can be a bit of a problem, especially if it shows up on turn 3, and just immediately start adding counters to stuff. And not to mention benefits of things when you draw cards, put stuff in the graveyard, whatever. And Esper Legends is already kind of a deck. But do other things start to emerge that can deal with that if we don't have to worry about Invoke Despair and Bankbuster and Fable? Don't know. It's possible. But I think this is one to probably keep your eye on. However, if that deck does end up being near the top of the competitive standings, this could be a card that goes up in value because, well, it came out a while ago and it's going to be legal for another year. So, something to think about. Also in that category is going to be Wedding Announcement. This is another card that I really like, and it teeters on that space of if it's too good or not. I think you're going to see more of it as we move forward, especially if you're in a world where control decks start to become more of a thing because now their planeswalkers are going to live longer. You're going to want more things that can survive sweepers or give you more value, and this falls firmly in that space. Now, admittedly, again, Farewell can still deal with it or whatever. It's whatever. But it does work in a lot of instances, and we've already seen this card popping up in a lot of decks, and I don't think we're going to see any less of it. As much as I think this card is less of an issue of the other ones, I think because it's going to show up so often and we're all going to get tired of it, I would not have had a problem with this being on the ban list either. That being said, especially if you're going to be playing some paper standard, I would consider going out and getting your hands on some of these because there's a real chance the value on this is going to keep going up. And then, of course, there's Atraxa. This one's a bit tougher, right? Because Atraxa, like, the problem is it gives so much value on one card, right? Rarely is it not at least 3 more cards in your hand, sometimes 4 plus. Also happens to fly, also happens to gain life, also has vigilance, right? It has a lot of stuff going on for the cost, and it's kind of the card to reanimate since we have so many quality reanimation spells. I mean, we have like, what, 6 in the format or something? One of them happens to be an invasion, and one of them happens to be a really good saga that just can do other great things as well. So, not a surprise, we're going to keep seeing Atraxa. My problem with Atraxa as a card, though, is that the whole game kind of comes down to being about Atraxa once it hits the battlefield. It's like everything else becomes sort of irrelevant, and we're playing a game of protect the Atraxa, which on some levels can be somewhat entertaining at times, but most of the time it's very just boring and overbearing. The other side is, a lot of times if you have an answer right then, you can still kill the opponent before they get use of all that extra value. So again, might be fine. Kind of need to see what the format's going to look like without those red-black decks existing. And do we get to play other cards that can affect or slow down things like Atraxa? Especially, let's say they're in Reanimator type decks. Do we move to cards that are exiling stuff from graveyards or not? Because that could be a little bit of extra value for some deck types. But currently those decks are not very good because of the black-red X decks that exist right now. So yeah, there's a lot to really think about and discover here with this new world of Standard. And honestly, I'm here for it. I think we needed a shakeup anyway because we're not going to get a Standard set this summer because we have Lord of the Rings coming in, what, like 4 weeks or something? And it actually doesn't go into Standard. So not having any type of shakeup would have been pretty bad for the next 4 months, I guess. This actually at least gives us something else to mess with, look forward to, and kind of a sneak peek of what Standard could look like till we add that extra 300 cards coming in the fall. But anyway, how did y'all feel about this? I don't know. I think there's still a lot of discussion to be had. And don't forget, they can still actually ban something in case of emergency if stuff goes sideways. So keep an eye out for that too. But yeah, overall, I'm mostly happy with this. If I had to give it a score on a 10-point scale, I'm somewhere around like a 7. You know, I like the cards that got banned needing banned, but I'm also willing to just explore and see where things go from here. So yeah, you'll let me know how you feel about this, because I think everybody's going to feel some kind of way. But otherwise, that's all I have for you for now. We'll see you next time.